Hello and welcome to another very special show here for our house. We have a very special guest. We have Mrs. Niki Hayes. She is the author of this wonderful John Saxon biography. You've already seen me do a video on a series I'm starting on my favorite quotes from the book. And she took an interest in him in the program, when she started implementing Saxon curriculum and the results that she saw, but she had her own battles to fight as well. So we're going to talk about that. I believe she is a true champion for children's education, and it's such a treat to have her out of retirement. We pulled her out to come here on our house. Thank you so much, Niki, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Karen. This is exciting.
Yes. So I want to hear more of your story, of course, just from reading it and your website online. But for those who are not familiar with you or the John Saxon autobiography, talk to us about your journey when it came to teaching and how you connected with Saxon Math and some of the struggles that you had to go through as well with it.
Well, a real quick trip is to say that I spent my first 20 years out of college in journalism because that was my major. And then I went back into teaching. I taught a couple of years, but then I went back into teaching, ended up teaching math to special ed kids. And I found out, wow, I really love math. So I went back and got my degree in math so I could teach regular ed kids. And then eventually, that was in Central Texas, in Waco and Killeen. And then I wanted to get back into Indian education because when I was in my master's program in Wisconsin, I worked with Indian tribes and different groups for really political reasons. And I wanted to get back working with Indians. And my grandfather was born on a reservation, but I wasn't raised Indian. But I always wanted to get back to where I knew more about what was going on. And I was hired on the Spokane Indian Reservation in 1991. And the superintendent there, I used to call him Ross Perot without the billions because he just didn't kind of put up with much of anything, which is my kind of leader. I kind of like that. And he said, your Saxon books are in your room. And I said, oh, I've heard they're not very good. Now, this was 1991. And John published his first book in 1981. And the battle with John Saxon was all through the 80s, but I didn't know anything about it. And so I went, okay. And after about 2 months of teaching, I thought, but this is the way I've taught for years, which is very methodical, lots of repetition with hopefully interesting ways of repeating the information. And my Indian kids, I was the only math teacher for grades 6 through 12 for the school. And wow. My Indian kids just zoomed in this book. And I like that term, zoom. And it just amazed me, And a couple of years later, the salutatorian of the school announced at graduation that she was going to get to go to graduation and that was go to college. And it was one of the first few Indian kids who were getting to go to college. Because of Saxon Math, she said. And I thought, okay, I'm onto something here. So then I had cancer, came back to Texas, got well, and I thought, oh, the heat in Central Texas is killing me. I think I'll go to Seattle. So I got a job in Seattle as a principal, K-5 principal, because I kept saying, the rubber hits the road at elementary school in mathematics. If we don't get them in elementary school, they're done for. And so I asked for elementary and they said, but you're a high school teacher. And I said, but that's okay. I want elementary. Well, that was a big shock to me, switching from high school to elementary. It was a whole other world. But anyway, the first year I got there, they were all white kids, 85% white kids. I was always used to working with gang kids, a lot of kids from different ethnicities and cultures. And so I thought, why are they scoring so low on the state test? I mean, all white kids are supposed to make really good grades. At least I thought so. And I started looking at the material, and it was one of the worst progressive books that was out there. And I talked to my teachers and I said, would you be willing to try Saxon Math? And they said, sure. Of course, I told them how wonderful it is and all that kind of stuff. And the minute the central office found out I was using Saxon Math in Seattle, my troubles began, because they were using the junk. And we had a new superintendent who had come in who decided on site-based decision-making, which meant every school got to choose whatever curriculum they thought their kids needed. So you didn't have to go with the district's choices, which I think is just wonderful, because if you know your kids, you know what materials they need. And so we were the only school out of 69 elementary schools that was using Saxon.
Wow.
And I kept being told that results didn't matter, that it was more important that I be part of the team, that I participate with the team. And I kept saying, but I didn't come here to be part of your team. I came to teach kids. And the fact that I was from Texas and Seattle didn't help me a whole lot. It was kind of funny. But anyway, bottom line was, at the end of the second year that we had used it, the kids had gone from scoring it, I'd have to look it up again, it was like the 60 percentile passing to the 80th percentile passing in 2 years on the state test. And of course, these were upper middle class white kids, but they'd been failing the other. So it had to be the curriculum. It couldn't be the children. And at the end of, I stayed there 4 years and I'd had cancer before, and then I got sick again and had to just teach half a day. And they hired me in Seattle to be a teacher half a day at one of the premier high schools. And I convinced the principal to let me use Saxon Math instead of the awful book they were using. Well, my students couldn't do it. It was too hard for them. Saxon was too hard because they were so used to being graded on effort and not on results. Mm-hmm. And as my supervisor told me when I kept saying with them about my elementary school, I kept saying, but look at the results, and it's a fuzzy test. They're making these good results. They're in the top 5% of the state. She said, results don't matter. It's about how you do it.
What?
And I thought, this is sick.
This is crazy.
Is sick. So, yeah. And so I stayed there at the high school for a year and a half, and I reached retirement age. And I thought, I can't do this, because they insisted that I take the Saxon books away from the kids, because the high school kids were complaining about me and about Saxon because I was too hard and Saxon was too hard. And so I just thought, I can't go to the books they want me to use. I just can't do it. And I retired, moved back to Waco, Texas. And after a year, I thought, you know what? John's story needs to be told, because I never met him. And I saw the results of his work. And I thought, I've got to tell his story. Well, 20 years in journalism, I love writing. And so I spent 16 months of writing, research, interviewing all these people, and then 5 months of getting it published. Couldn't get anyone to publish the book, no one. And finally, his 2 daughters, he's got 4 children, and his 2 daughters helped pay for the publication of the book. And that's really the story of how John's story got told. But my life was no different from almost any teacher who taught Saxon in a public school. They just got beaten to death if they wanted to teach it, unless the district. Now, your smaller schools and your charter schools, even today, they will go for Saxon. But your big schools, they're so politically driven, and they're not going to touch it.
Wow. Now, I know, from reading your book, I can see why it seemed almost like a personal vendetta against him in his hometown and his state. But I mean, in Seattle, what was their reasoning? Why were they so strongly against Saxon Math? What was their problem with it?
Well, because he would not back down. And when they would make some off-the-wall comment, especially he really got upset when they kept saying that minorities and girls could not learn math the way white males can. That white males can learn only by logic and rational reasoning and deductive thinking. And John said, but that's what math is. That's what you study historically for 4,000 years. We've been studying math, and that's what it is. And they said, no, 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 no. Girls can't learn that way. Only white males, and minorities can't learn that way. Only white, that's Asians and white males. That's the way they learn math. They came up with that, we don't know where, but he would say, you're liars, and you're racist, and you're sexist. And no one had ever fought back on them, never stood up to them, because they were the elites and they made the decisions. But we see what's happening right now, 30 years later. This has become full force because of the whole, what is it, the critical, I can't even think of the word because I'm so upset with it.
The critical race theory stuff.
The critical race theory. That, and they're changing math to be totally fuzzy and to teach it historically, where the whites have been in control of it. The European white men was what we copied from. And so they're very good at digging in and staying with it. But they hated Saxon Math also because, as they said, he did not become one of them as one of the group that produced the books. When he saw what his students needed and he wrote his book, he didn't want anybody's permission because he knew what he was doing was good. And he didn't like what he was seeing with the elites. And he fought them. The book tells you he fought them. And he would go to conferences to have a table, to sell his books just like they did. And they would get a hold of whoever had the conference and take his table away from him. And he would have to go find a room in another hotel and somehow get everybody to come to that room to let him talk about his books. So he fought them for 15 years until he died.
Wow. And something I didn't know, until reading your book is how much money he spent of his own money, like just the articles that he published in papers, over $100,000 just to put these announcements, these ads, until the paper even was like, we're not even going to let you, they wouldn't take his money. I mean, it's just insane, unbelievable.
Well, and when you realize that he borrowed from his children and mortgaged his house to publish the Algebra 1 book, after he had, and this is the other thing that no other publisher has ever done, or any author of any math book has ever done, he had a year-long review of his material by 22 schools in Oklahoma. And they taught, he went in his little Pinto car. That's what he had after he retired from the Air Force. He went in his little Pinto car with his trunk full of books and convinced 22 schools with a teacher in each school to use his Saxon material. And at the end of that year, the teachers union for Oklahoma checked his material and his test scores and verified they were accurate. And then he went to publishing, trying to get his everything published. And so for him to do that and have proof, he's the only publisher that's ever done that kind of period review to see if the books even work. And so for him to do that and then to borrow from his kids and mortgage his house and have his book printed in China, it had to be printed in China, it shows his dedication, his total commitment, his passion for doing what he believed was right, just threw people for a loop, just threw them for a loop.
And I don't think people know the full extent unless they read your book. I mean, you went into detail. It sounded like you were there every step of the way. How detailed. So how did you get all these stories and accounts, everything, and how long did it take?
His wonderful daughter in Oklahoma, Sarah, had his notebooks. He was a historian at heart. And when he started his company, he created records of all of the publications that he had, all the newspaper articles, all the magazines, all of his speeches, everything. And then they had his videos, home videos, where they had made him sit down and talk about his life and his work in the Saxon. I mean, his children, three of them are doctors, and Sarah's a pharmacist. And because he wanted them to do their own thing, not follow him and what he was doing. And so she had all of this material, and she gave it to me to bring to Texas to look at, with this trust in her heart that I would do the right thing. So I read 2,000 articles. 2,000 articles were in those scrapbooks.
Wow.
And I looked at 9 home videos where he's talking about all of his battles and you know, everything he was doing. And so I did. They said, even his kids and his friends said, I think a biographer gets to know a person better than the family or the friends, because you get a broader perspective of him, and you hear things that others don't hear. And so they've been very grateful, saying that they learned things about their dad and about their friend and about their colleague. And so, yeah, it's, once I got into it, I just, you know, it was like, then I'm going to print this book. I'm going to publish this book. I don't care how it gets done. His story has to be told.
And you don't even take profits from the book, right? What do you do with the book sales?
The first couple of years I did take profits, because I was trying to pay them back and then they said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This is our gift to you for doing this. But after that, he loved West Point. He graduated from West Point, and he loved that school. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give all money to the West Point Mathematical Department of Sciences in John Saxon's name. And so that's what I've done. Every year during the year, I send a check to West Point in his name for the math department for them to use however they want to.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so generous. And, you know, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on this kind of, you know, because we're both women of faith. Reading this, I just think, wow, there was so many times where he could have died, just near misses, right? Even, I mean, flying upside down in an airplane without being strapped in. Do you feel like God did protect him, preserve him in order to do this work?
He had 4 airplane crashes. Yeah, he had 4. And, you know, and one of them, he nearly didn't walk away from. A woman pulled him from the cockpit of that one, or he would have died. A woman worker, farm worker in Oklahoma, I think it was Oklahoma, that she pulled him out of the airplane. And he was not very religious in the beginning, and he became so as time went on. And one of his favorite passages is, and I can't think of the verse, but it's in Matthew, but to you each get what you deserve, you know, and so for him to come that circle around, I didn't find that out until the end of all my research, because his other daughter, Selby in Dallas, who's a doctor, she said he truly was a man true to himself. He really believed in himself. And she said, God knew what was going on.
Wow. And he did, I mean, his backstory, his childhood, everything, it's not just like, yeah, I don't even know how to explain it, but anybody can develop that kind of confidence. Would you say that's fair? No matter what situation you come from, how you grow up, could you be as confident as him, you think, in their mission in life and be successful against all odds?
No, there was something. Of course, his dad was a school principal and superintendent, and his mother was a teacher, and they didn't let him get away with much of anything, you know, and were very, very strict on him. But for whatever reason, he was totally dedicated to the truth. And there's a story in there when he was in the first grade, and the first grade teacher bragged on him about something that he did, that he knew he didn't do well in what he was doing. And it bothered him that she lied to him in the first grade. And that's kind of an interesting story, because so many kids just take, you know, goody stuff that's said to them and go with it. And so he was really, really determined that I have come up, and I'll interject this in here, I have come up with the ABCs of learning and teaching, and I related it then to math, especially accuracy, brevity, and clarity. I kind of got that out of the journalism too before it turned sour, now as we have it today. But in journalism, you're supposed to have
Yes.
accuracy, brevity, and clarity. And he really believed in clarity. That's why his books are considered, as the progressives say, even a monkey could learn Saxon because it's so simplistic.
Right. And, and kind of another personal question. Do you think all the fighting, I mean, even you too, you had a lot of fighting to do as well. Do you think it does impact your health, the stress of it? I mean, do you think it impacted him? He had, quadruple bypass surgery, was it? I mean, you had health issues as well. Do you think all that stress from fighting for kids' education had a part in it, or not really?
I think with him, it invigorated him. He was a warrior. He was a warrior at heart. In World War II and in Korea, he was a decorated bomber pilot. He loved a battle, and he said, this is a good war. This is a good war that we're having a fight in education now. With me, yeah, I got pretty ticked off a lot. And I had to be kind of careful because my mouth overloads my brain, as my father used to tell me. And so I had to sometimes suck it up. And I think that, I don't think it affected my health. I'm 81. Just this last Tuesday, I turned 81.
And you look fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you. But, and I do, I have this fireman who is kind of like a son to me, and he comes over and he's caught me one day out in the yard, and I had my chainsaw on a tree, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm cutting a tree. And he said, you're too old. And I said, the day will come. The day will come, So I take out my aggression by yard work and chainsaws.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you have that fighter spirit, and he did as well. I mean, because you had to do a lot of pushing against the grain, which I was going to ask you, where did you find the energy to do that? I mean, it sounds, reading it and your story as well, it just sounds exhausting. So what kind of just keeps you in the battle, keeps you fighting, gives you that energy?
I would probably have to say that my father he was Scots-Irish, and he was a worker, a hard worker. And to him, if you took on a job, you worked hard at it and you finished it and you did a good job. And I think probably my dad had a huge impact. So I don't know, it's kind of, the other thing, Karen, is when you know that children's lives are being impacted by books and teachers and schools, and parents are trusting that. And then you've lived, I've been a teacher and a tutor now for 38 years, and you see things that people don't see. It's got to be clarified. Accuracy, brevity, and clarity. The truth has got to be told. It's got to be told clearly, briefly, because people have short attention spans, and it's got to be accurate, or it's not worth telling. And so I've just always believed that you better tell it right, or it's going to bite you.
Yes.
And that takes energy. It takes energy to tell it right.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, I want to ask you too, what are some tips you have for parents today, with everything going on with school, parents thinking about, should they send their kids this fall to school, or homeschoolers who are struggling with math, just in general? What tips do you have for us parents? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. A couple of things that I've written down in my notes is that I think we need to clarify the difference between mathematicians and math educators. It's a huge world of difference, and you may already know this. Mathematicians make their living doing math and building rockets and roadways and living in the world of math. Math educators are supposed to find out how to use that math in classrooms to help teachers, to help children learn how to use that math to make their lives better. Not because math is got a color or a race or a gender or any of that, because math is so plain and so pure, and it can just help open up doors of understanding. So when you're looking for math materials, you need to look for materials that are going to be clear and easily understood. even if it seems that they're repetitive and tiresome, because John's books were written one problem at a time. He wrote one problem to prepare for another problem. That's why you don't skip problems in the Saxon books. And I did the first year I used them before I learned what I was supposed to do. Because when you skip a problem, it's like skipping a step on a stairway. Those problems may be repetitive, but they're needed to reinforce the memory. And so I would recommend that they, number one, remember that math educators are supposed to be people who know how to teach children. And unfortunately, there's one set of books out there called Go Math. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the first grade book, for example, has 741 pages in it. First grade.
Wow.
741 pages. And of the people who authored the book, only one of them has any classroom experience. The rest of them, and they didn't write the book, they just kind of oversaw what was written. So you have to be careful the materials that you use. And Stephen Hake brought this up, that John was, and he was deadly about this, if people can't put their name on the front of the book, then they're not willing to stand for what's inside of it. And you don't find too many math books today with the name of the writer on the front of the book, except Saxon and Stephen Hake. So I would say you have to look for sure for a name. You have to, and the other thing, John was ridiculed because he didn't have color or pictures in his books. And he said, I use that space to give them examples to practice with, because I'm not going to teach them about colors and pictures, teaching them about math.
He knew to stay in his lane. Yes.
Yeah. So I would say that. And then the other thing, there are two mistakes that all teachers are having to watch out for, whether you're at home or in the classroom, but the classroom teachers aren't having much choice. The critical thinking idea that you can teach children to think critically. The frontal lobe of the brain does not start developing for critical thinking until about age 11 or the 5th grade. Mm-hmm. And then it completes its growth about age 25. So to ask a second grader to think critically about why 2 + 2 = 4 is professional, what do I want to say, cruelty.
Aaron. Yeah, abuse. It is.
It's abuse. You teach them that 2 + 2 = 4 and let them just learn that. And it's okay to memorize, because as you and I have talked about, Malcolm Gladwell saying that you have to have 10,000 hours of practice to become a master in anything. Yes. In his book, Outliers. And John knew that. I mean, he had seen that as a teacher, that you have to practice it. First responders, can you imagine them not practicing over and over and over how to do something so they don't have to stop and think about how to solve a problem? Or the other thing is, even if you thought of children having to learn music, music is a math. Math is in music, totally. But if you said, I don't want them to have to practice all that time. I don't want them to have to learn those notes, because that's just boring. So you're going to teach them to play by ear? Is that going to be the way they're going to learn how to play an instrument? Then how do they teach somebody else how to play the instrument if they don't know how to read notes and they don't know how to listen? So I think you have to stop and realize, number one, if you're a teacher, you don't have to be excellent in math. John Saxon fixed it so you don't have to be excellent in math.
Yes, very true.
Or a parent, you know.
Yes. Yeah, those are great tips. So when you use Saxon Math, how would you do it today? I know you said you used to skip problems, but in general, how would you recommend parents, if they're using the textbooks, at home, would you say, of course, do every problem, do every lesson, but also take the tests? And maybe you can address this as well. Some people do not believe it's possible to do a whole textbook in one year. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are 120 lessons and there are 185 days in a year. So you're supposed to do a lesson a day. And then if you discover that the child hasn't really mastered, you need an 80% mastery rate before you go to the next lesson. If that's not happened, you've got to reteach it. So that can take up a day. Probably the first year, it might be a little hard if you're just using Saxon for the first time. But the second year, because you're used to the Saxon method and the program, then it's easier and you know how fast to move and how your kid is learning it. And then the third year, I told you the story of what my fifth graders did at my school in Seattle. They had had Saxon Math for 2 years. And then when they got to the fifth grade, they finished their fifth grade book by the end of the first semester. And the teacher wanted the sixth grade book. And I said, okay, so I got it for her. And they were so good. The kids were moving so fast, which I'll tell you, that's another point. They finished it in April, and she said, can we have the seventh grade book for the month of May? And I said,
Wow.
yes. And I got that for her, but the bottom line is that the Saxon books are not supposed to be grade level books. A lot of people don't know this. They're skill level books. So if your child can go through the second or third or fourth grade book in 6 months, let him do it. Don't drag it out. Let him go as fast as, because the faster they go and the more they feel success, the better they're going to love math. Because, wow, look what I've been able to do. So I would say they might have trouble the first year finishing because they're having to get used to everything. But I would really encourage them, if they think they can skip a day, or the test covers 5 lessons. If you think your child is smart enough to skip all 5 lessons, you can give them the test. You get 2 tests for each group, each 5 lessons. You can give them 1 test, and if they make 80%, you can skip those 5 lessons. It's just you can't skip lessons because you think you're bored and you think they don't need it because they're bored.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So if there are students at home or at school that are struggling, especially like when it comes to home, what are some interventions? You've done tutoring. So what's some advice that you can give maybe parents who don't feel confident in math themselves? How can they help a struggling math student at home?
Well, I'm a big believer, believe it or not, in manipulatives and letting them apply some math to the real world, whether it's helping cook something in the kitchen or helping dad with tools or helping do anything outside. And that's how I learned math. My dad was in rope instruction work, and I was his assistant in mechanics and working with mechanical stuff. And I learned, oh, that tool is about 5 feet over there. Go get it, or get me that 1/4 inch wrench. And so if you can let them see the math used, take a day and let them see math used in the real world. Find out. One of the best things I saw even my high school kids love to do is to go to Goodwill and buy used, any kind of used tool in the kitchen, like a beater, a mixer, or anything that they could take apart and look at the inside and see how the parts look and then try to put it back together and make it work.
That's such a great idea. I love that. I never thought about that.
You can get stuff for $1, $2 in these shops and just take it apart. And my mom insisted I make my own clothes starting in the 7th grade. So I sewed. I learned to sew. If you can show them that's what put John into math. He hated math until he enlisted in the military in 1943 and wanted to be a pilot and found out he had to know math to be a pilot. That's what made him go to math, was he wanted to use it, in his real world. So I would say, whatever you may be studying, I love geometry. That's my favorite. And my kids had to build, all of my students had to build doll houses, groups of 4. I'd buy a big dollhouse. I got the district to spring for the money. And they would build a dollhouse and have to tell me how much will it cost to heat it, cool it, paint it, carpet it, all that kind of stuff. And the high school kids that were all gang kids, these were all gang kids, they loved it because they loved working with their hands.
Wow. That's incredible. Those are some great tips. We'll have to have you on again. Give us some more, because that's really good. Just, I wanted to know too, your thoughts. I could pick your brain all day. What are your thoughts with how education is going today? Parents who are thinking, should I keep my kids in school or take them out or homeschool them? Just from your experience and how you see things kind of going full circle and cyclical, do you have any idea, predictions where we're going here? What's going on with public education?
I'm afraid that it's pretty negative on the big schools, the big districts, because the bottom line is politics. It's not about learning or teaching, and unions. And I was in a union in Seattle, and it's when you realize the little schools, charter schools, or homeschooling, or not necessarily even private schools, but the Catholic school that I tutored in for the last 10 years, they have gone totally traditional. They dropped Saxon Math and went progressive. And I kept saying, I refused to go back and work the first semester they did that as a tutor. And finally, they saw what was going on. And I went back and stayed the next few years. And now they have dropped the garbage, and they have selected a Catholic program out of Dallas. And it's traditional or classical. And so all you can do is at your school is see what books they're using and what is your teacher's philosophy. And if the teacher ever says to a parent, and I threaten teachers if they ever did this, if you ever say to a parent, you don't have anything to say about the curriculum because we get to choose that. Excuse me? You don't get to say anything about the curriculum? The parents are the ones who are supposedly helping that child at home with homework or whatever. And if the parents are not able to understand the curriculum, which a lot of them can't with the new stuff because it is not about classical methods, then they've got to do something to protect that child. That's just the way it is. Now, usually your smaller, more rural schools will be more amenable, because when you have to look at those children's eyes every day and see if they're confused about what you're doing and you don't fix it, God's going to get you.
Yeah.
I believe that with all my heart.
That's such a hard place to be in. That's awful.
It is. But parents have to be willing to go in and ask to sit in the classroom for half a day. I had parents a lot of times, they came in to work and help in the school, in the classrooms. But they need to know what's going on. And if a child is crying while trying to do homework because it's so confusing, no good. We can't do that.
Right. And I just can't believe these school districts just turned a blind eye to it. Is it because you think they're not seeing it, they're not in the classroom, or just deeply political?
They're not seeing it because they don't want to see it. They do see it as ideology, their ideological beliefs. They believe that somehow those children or those parents are going to finally just give in and realize that they, the teachers or the school, they know it all and they know it better. And no one knows their child better than the parent. And a good teacher who, as I said, when you look in a child's eyes and they're confused and they're scared because they don't know what to do and they don't understand what you're doing, that's why I retired early. I'd planned to teach until I was 70. There was no way I was going to quit. And I quit when I was 65.
Wow. That's tough. It's such a tough situation. So homeschooling, tons of benefits. That's one of them. You're choosing the curriculum and you can choose Saxon. Now, some parents have a hard time finding the older hardback, and then they're kind of hesitant and resistant to buy the newer versions. How do you feel about the newer versions? Still better than a lot of the other curriculum where people don't put their name on it?
don't buy any Saxon that is past the 3rd edition. The 4th edition is garbage. That was the one printed by the new publisher. So 3rd edition is good. 2nd edition is good. 1st edition is okay. It was written to be a little bit easier. That was his first book, and he wanted it to be a little bit easier. But the 2nd and 3rd editions, he sold 7 million books in his 15 years. So there are books out there, and you may have to find them. In fact, Stephen Hake and I had talked at one point, or maybe I didn't talk to him yet. I was thinking about talking to somebody about trying to gather up all of the Saxon books and all of the nooks and crannies and getting them in a warehouse somewhere, and think, oh, this would be such a good thing to do. And maybe somebody's able to do that. But bottom line is, there's another one, and I'll send you an email on it. I want to check it out, but it's called the Shorman Math, Schormann. I'll do it. I'll send you the information. And he has it online, and he also has Saxon online. And so, and I've talked with him. He is a wonderful Christian man. And he and I looked at his new information, and I'm pleased that he's following the same methodology that Saxon does in what he does on his program. So if there's, something besides Saxon that you can't get Saxon, if there's something that'll work as well, that's okay. But the traditional books are not being published. You will hear the rumor, and Stephen, I'm waiting to have Stephen tell me, that Saxon supposedly isn't going to be published after 2024. So, yeah. So, because it's just, they aren't willing to put it on digital because it's traditional. I mean, it's the best way to kill something is just stop publishing it.
Right. Yeah. And I do get a lot of emails from people in India that they want to do this method. They want to use the Saxon textbooks, and there's just no way that they can get them. If they're looking for an online version, something they can do, find online. So that's.
I'll get a hold of Dave Shorman and see, because I haven't talked to him for a while, and see how he's doing with his new stuff that he's doing. But the fact you bring up India, right now in America, in the United States, the tutoring business is $4.8 billion in this country. Tutoring, most of it is in math because kids are not learning math in schools. And much of the learning comes from India online because they produce more PhDs in math and science than any other country, more than China. So India, they're moving, So I think there's just a need. That's another thing I keep thinking about, the need of kind of like a clearinghouse of information of where things are, where to get just nice list of sites and sources. So I have all these thoughts.
We're giving you all this homework and projects, but that's good. Yeah. Stephen Hake, I'm like emailing him like, hey, parents want that flashcard guide. They keep asking about it. We're just putting y'all to work. Because, you guys really are just champions for children's education. It's kind of, hard today, finding that's a very noisy world. We just want the basics, like I said, traditional, incremental, and review. That's it,
I want to show you something. I said before that you said for parents to have kind of a little clue. See if you can see this. You see where that diagonal is on this chart?
Yes.
Multiplication chart. If you teach kids this, they know this. If you teach them this, they know this, because it's the diagonal on a multiplication table is the opposite of the top and the bottom. So they really only have to learn half the table.
I never knew this until you told me about it. Is there a link or somewhere parents can print that exact printout?
I went on the internet the other day and I just put in multiplication table, printable multiplication table, and you come up with all kinds of stuff. The other one is this one, and what you can do is make this little strip so they can follow a row up and down.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so this one you may know about, but I got this off of the same site. So I can possibly look this up and find out which site it was and send that to you as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Then I can just link it down below this video because I'm sure parents are going to ask. It's a jungle out there trying to find printables.
I know. That's why I'm saying I know if John were alive, he would be doing it. He would be making this clearinghouse of information because he just wanted things to be clear.
Yes, that's so important. That's what parents want, just simplicity, effective, clear plan. I know we're like wrapping up here, but I loved how you explained this, what happened with education. Because I was asking, well, how did we get from raise arithmetic? Maybe we can end the video here just because I didn't know, and I'm sure parents in my generation were just not, we don't know. How did we get to this point in our country? From raise arithmetic, you know, from the very beginning when group schooling started this way to where we are now. What were the influences that have created this system?
Well, as you and I talked a little bit, John Dewey in the 1920s brought in the whole progressive movement where it was about let's let kids feel good instead of worrying about if they're learning. And then it progressed through the years slowly in the back burner. And then in the 50s, quite frankly, I have to admit that our wonderful generation that won World War II was so concerned about their children not having to suffer the way they did. They wanted life made easier for them. So in the 50s, it started kind of shaking with the math, making it easier. And then in the 60s, as we know, the 1960s just kind of threw everybody up in the air. And it was, if you feel good, do it. And from the 60s on, and then Sputnik, that's a whole nother story that all brought it round circle. But then in the 80s, the teachers union kind of people, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, decided it was time to go calculators and go computers. And so we don't want to bother with all that memorization stuff because you can do it on a calculator. So we aren't going to learn all the traditional stuff anymore. We can just punch buttons. And that was the beginning of where we are today.
Wow. Well, if parents need encouragement at all, they can just turn to your book. I mean, it's fascinating. It's encouraging when it comes to just math and John Saxon and Saxonizing everything. You can take things like, even in your own life, right, grammar or anything, and think, how could you kind of Saxonize this, right, to make it really easy for kids? You kind of give that blueprint here. Tell us a little bit more. What's in the book? Because you added a lot of resources in the back as well. So can you tell us what's in it?
Well, one of the things that Selby, his daughter, wanted me to include, and she insisted that I include, and I'm glad she did, was the 3 chapters right in the center called the Math Warrior's Almanac, and it tells how to teach Saxon effectively and why. And it'll give you, if I had known that stuff when I was teaching it, I would have made fewer mistakes. So it's not a way of getting people to buy books. And by the way, with your group, it's, $20 a book. I've dropped it for any homeschooling parent. I always drop the cost of the book. And so the 3 chapters would be very helpful if they wanted to get the book to really see how to use Saxon effectively, more efficiently. And then I think if they would also read, the first 8 chapters are his life and explain how he turned into the person he did. But then at the end, it shows he was also quite a philanthropist, a huge philanthropist, and gave a lot of money, as you said, to different people. And I think I just want people to honor him because he's one of the few that we have who is willing to stand up and fight. And I mean, he fought. He just fought.
He did. And so where can people find the book? Where can they order it?
You can go to my website. Oh, if they'll just go to the website, they can learn a whole lot about his philosophy. So yeah, go to saxonmathwarrior.com and you'll find a page for order. And it's got my name and address and all that good stuff. And it says I think it says $27, but if it's, you know, just say I'm a homeschooling parent and I know to send, it's $20.
Nice.
No mail or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's funny because your website, that Saxon Warrior website, is what inspired me to create my first video on John Saxon. It's called The Controversial History of John Saxon. Have that video up for a few years now. And through that, Stephen Hake saw me and we connected and got him. And then he said, you should really talk to Nikki Hayes. And then we connected. So it's full circle here from your website, which is fantastic. That's a great website. Highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So any last thoughts you'd like to share? Any last words of encouragement for parents out there?
Be strong, be firm,
Yes.
demand if you have to, but don't let anybody tell you that you are the only one who's complaining.
I love that. Thank you so much for being on the channel today. I hope you could do it again soon. I'm sure there'll be other questions parents have. You have great tips, you know, when it comes to math, helping kids that are struggling. Thank you so much. And thank you for writing such a fantastic book. It's just so encouraging. That I know this was a lot of work. This was definitely a labor of love. So just thank you for that. And thank you for being on the show again.
Thank you, Karen, for inviting me. It's been fun.
Yes, we'll talk soon. All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.